a couple of leads from our various state partner organizations to speak to some of their recent work to win at the ballot, to prepare to win at the ballot, and some of the considerations that they're making and kind of thinking through where, what, how much does it cost? What are some of the things that we need to have in place to be successful? How are we navigating the process and kind of thinking about the process and the partnerships and the power that we'll need to advance something. So we're going to start by, first of all, having everyone who can applaud the amazing work of New Mexico. Matthew Henderson is here. They've just won this historic constitutional amendment that he's going to tell us about what it is and some about how they got there and some of the barriers that they faced along the way. And then we're going to pivot to hearing from Prentice Haney from the Ohio Organizing Collaborative to talk more about some of the work and some of their thinking about advancing work at the local level and kind of what's going into that. And then we're going to pivot to hearing from Sharon Bernstein from Family Forward, which is my previous role. So I might chime in there a little bit, but to hear about the work that Oregon is doing to kind of landscape a potential statewide ballot measure and what's gone into that to this point. So with that, Matthew, I'm going to hand it to you.
Thanks, Andrea. And, there's a lot to say about this success. So please intervene and ask and nudge and ask me questions. Yeah, we're pretty delighted. Some of our folks were predicting win numbers like what we got at 70%. I did not. So we were really delighted that all the indications we were getting that our campaign was effective turned out to be true. And we now, I think, can make a really good case that we should be doing this more places. We're kind of obsessed with some of our national colleagues, like Andrea, of trying to figure out how we make the case that there really is a child care voter. No matter how really firm you think that is, I do think it's interesting. Some of the things I've heard from folks who worked on our campaign, our pollster said, well, he didn't really comment on that, but he said, it seemed obvious to me that we should be doing this in the 5 states that voted for abortion rights. The opposition's already on the defensive. They will be ham-handed in figuring out how to respond to a child care initiative. And we know we've got a base that doesn't perfectly overlap. It's certainly not the same folks who would run a child care campaign, but there's definitely some affinity there. And we all know fantastic groups in California and Michigan, for starters, that could do this kind of stuff. The highlights I would say about the campaign is that it really was a very well done campaign. We really did have a broad base. New Mexico has a lot of collaboration among movement organizations, and we really were able to draw on a lot of colleagues who've done coordinated election work over the years with us and with each other effectively to drive a really robust field campaign and to also just take over the sort of digital and social media realm. One of our challenges was earned media. Probably our biggest opponent in this whole campaign was the Albuquerque Journal. So people were really not interested in talking about this in the press until it was sort of upon us, and then really sort of, titrated the stories that they were willing to put into their news feeds about us. So we really did have to spend a lot on paid media, which, normally I would not say is something that I support, since we're really sort of field focused. But thinking about 2024, I do feel like these crowded ballots do require paid media and paid mail just to make sure people know it's there, because we knocked on 500,000 doors in an election that had 700,000 votes cast. And that was big, but it still is not reaching everybody. Yeah, so I'm not sure where else you all would really be interested in me going in deeper.
Yeah.
Funding,
Oh, so go ahead, finish what you were going to
yeah,
say.
yeah, I could talk about funding, or yeah, do you have other guidance of what would be helpful to talk about?
Yeah, if you want to give us a quick overview of the funding, and then I think what I'll suggest is we go to Prentice and then Sharon and then come back to everyone for sort of Q&A, if that's okay. But I also just want to comment like, wow, you knocked $1 million doors. Like,
$500,000.
yes. Yeah. Talking about the scale of like this kind of an effort, I think is really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So funding, of course, we were enormously worried about. We started early. We got a good boost right off the bat with a enormous grant from Kellogg that was it used the project grant rule so that we could use it in ways that impacted our game lobbying voters. And let me just say that we also did a lot of particularly skillful maneuvers with this money, because of course the 1.25 million did not go into the PAC account. It came to the OLE Education Fund. The OLE Education Fund, of course, could not exceed its lobbying thresholds. So we checked with Kellogg and they allowed us to basically re-grant those funds as we wished to our field partners. So we were actually using Kellogg funds to grant to field partners, sometimes C4 organizations. So we would write up grant agreements with them that were clear how the funds could not be used, mostly for groups that were doing partisan stuff in addition to the ballot initiative stuff simultaneously. But we also found another way to approach that ball of wax, especially when more and more C4 groups wanted to do partisan stuff as we were approaching election day. There's a lot of mechanics here I won't bore you with now, but I feel like we really have sort of figured out a way to do that without freaking out any funders, lawyers, or the authorities. So I'm happy to talk more about that. But then after that, the Children's Funding Accelerator sort of got us going in the spring, and it was really help from Rachel, help from Community Change to sort of get us in to meetings with C4 childcare funders, which we can probably count on two hands, right? It's a pretty small number, seems to be growing. Imaginable Futures made their very first C4 contribution to this campaign. So I do see hopeful signs there. And we had some late surprises. I'm happy to talk through the whole list of C4 funders with anyone who really wants the dirt, because it's not all really showing up in the PAC report. But, we couldn't get, we never figured out how to crack the code with, is it Mackenzie Scott? Mackenzie Scott. But Save Our Children Action Network scored 200,000 last minute from the evil Jeff Bezos himself, or rather his parents. So that was an interesting surprise. Anyway, so that is going to be a big concern going forward. We raised in the end about $4 million for the campaign. Not all of it hard, some of it this PGR fund, and then we raised, about 600,000 from Hilton and others that could not allow any of it to be used for lobbying. But because we believe very much in a long-term engagement model of voter engagement, we were canvassing as early in April. The theory being that initial face-to-face engagement is reinforced by followed up digital engagement and sometimes face-to-face engagement, recruitment, pulling people into this campaign and the issue campaigns we imagine following this campaign around early educator pay and stuff like that. Anyway, God, where was I even going with this thought?
Matthew, it's okay if it's okay for a minute. I think that's really, really helpful
Okay.
context on like the overall cost and kind of the sources of funding and some of the restrictions and the importance of C4 investments. So thank you so much for that. I do want to give a couple of minutes to Prentice to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in Ohio. And I know Prentice is on the road, so he's fitting us in.
Yes, can you all hear me?
I think it's
Yes,
just the
we can.
shading.
You say yes?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great, thank you. And thank you all for being here. Yes. So first thing I want to say is that, direct democracy is one of our best tools to actually win, good policy for children, for childcare providers in the entire industry. In Ohio, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, we've been using direct democracy ballot initiatives for a number of different issues for years, and it has been an accelerator for
Prentice, you're cutting out a little bit.
for our constituents to
We might be losing you.
go out something they believe in and actually pass. Okay, can you all hear me now?
We can now.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, well, I'll be quick because I think it's too long. So, what we're working on right now is that we're currently building out a local county initiative to expand to hopefully a universal child care program for Franklin County residents. We recently was able to win a $23 million ARPA implementation program for children, for child care providers and the early learning teachers, where scholarships are going to Cliff and Fleck parents, and then additional incentive pay was going to child care providers, and there was emerging rental assistance for early childhood teachers. And so what our hope is that we are going to be able to build out a program that builds on that $23 million investment from ARPA, and then add additional dollars to get closer to a universal system by 2026. And what we don't want is to have all this money come in for children, and then we have a drop off after the ARPA money goes away. And we've already been looking at the polling, and what we know about what these initiatives do locally is that they create opportunities for Black voters and voters of color to show up on issues that they care about every single day. In places, this is not a childcare thing, but let me just give an example. In Akron, on Tuesday night, you all may have heard of Jalen Walker, who was shot and killed by police officers earlier this year. Organizers on the ground fought and got a police oversight ballot on the ballot this year. And while that ballot won overwhelmingly in the city of Cincinnati, there was also a congressional race happening in the same area where a Black woman who was championing some of these issues was also able to get elected to Congress. And while our primary issue is around children, we know that these particular issues draw out more voters, and they draw out bipartisan voters, because fighting for children, fighting for families is a bipartisan issue. Funding it is not quite so much, but when we craft campaigns that are local and even statewide campaigns that allow us to get there, we create opportunities where we can win these policies. And so I'll stop there and see if Andrea will be answering other questions specifically.
Yeah, thank you, Prentice. I'm going to pivot us to hearing a little bit from Sharon from Oregon, and then we'll come back. It looks like we have a few more minutes added to our time, so we'll come back for a few questions, but do feel free to also type your questions in the chat if you have them. Sharon.
Hi, well, I would bounce off of that and start by saying that I do think that we're finding in Oregon that our work on childcare has more bipartisan support than other work that we've done in terms of being on board with the issue, and that then where the rubber hits the road is around funding, and that's where it gets a lot more difficult. And of course, part of the reason is that there simply isn't enough funding, that building a universal childcare system is going to take a lot more funding than we have right now, and is going to take funding at multiple different levels. So we have run successfully past a preschool for all ballot initiative in Multnomah County, which is our largest county. That was back in 2020. We're working with some other counties now, especially Washington County, to start building a campaign there. I think it's really important that in both these places, these campaigns came from the ground. They didn't come from our advocacy organization. They're coming from the ground up. And then we are also working with our partners across the board on looking into revenue issues statewide.